Welcome to the Autism Central podcast, the home of real stories, honest conversations, and shared wisdom from England's National Autism Peer Education Programme. Here, we bring together autistic people and the people who love, support, and care for autistic people of all ages and backgrounds to explore every aspect of life. The National Autism Peer Education Programme is delivered by Anna Freud and commissioned by NHS England. Through education, coaching, and connection, we offer resources, group webinars, one-to-one peer support, and community events that centre lived experience and build real understanding. Our vision is a society where autistic people, their families, and those who support them are empowered, connected, and thriving. This is your space, your community, your podcast. Welcome to Autism Central. Hello and welcome. This episode includes an honest conversation about the experiences of two fathers in the SEND space. Some of their reflections touch on gender, school communication, and how support networks in their experience are often experienced differently by mums and dads. The views shared here are personal perspectives from the guests based on their lived experiences. We recognise that many families and professionals are working really hard to support children with SEND and that experiences may vary widely. So we invite listeners to approach this conversation with curiosity and care. We're going to explore the experiences of Mike and Phil, who are both navigating and have been navigating the SEND system. Their reflections highlight some of the barriers that they have faced when they have been engaging with schools and support spaces, along with some of the practical things that dads can do to become more involved in the SEND space, whilst also recognising the important role that many mums and carers already play in advocating for their children. Mike Karinsky is a mental health nurse with over 20 years of experience working in the NHS. His career took a transformative turn when he attended the pilot of the National Autism Trainer Programme, an experience that reshaped both his professional path and his personal understanding. Becoming a trainer for the programme opened doors to inspiring colleagues and mentors who believed in him, welcomed him, and taught him in ways he will always treasure. In 2025, Mike embarked on a journey of personal discovery with his family. He and his son were both diagnosed with ADHD, and at the end of the year, his daughter was diagnosed autistic. Mike's diagnosis has brought clarity to lifelong challenges and helped him recognise what he needs to thrive. Most importantly, authentic connection with people who share similar lived experiences. Whilst waiting for his assessment, he discovered a lack of local support for neurodivergent men and dads. Determined to fill that gap, he founded NADS, Neuroaffirming Dudes and Dads, in January 2025, a growing community built on understanding, belonging, and shared experience. Phil is a mental health nurse with 23 years' experience in health and social care, and he started his career 3 months after Mike working in the same hospital. 22 years later, they reunited when Phil saw a post from Mike about NADS on LinkedIn. Phil received his autism diagnosis after his eldest daughter, who's autistic, and his wife, who is ADHD, were both diagnosed in the same year. So welcome both of you to the podcast. I thought we could start with your parenting journey because becoming a parent completely reshapes your sense of self, and that's often even more so when we put neurodivergence into the picture. So can you take us back to your early days of fatherhood and perhaps share what might have felt challenging for you, what was unexpected? Because at that point, you were both undiscovered neurodivergent dads raising undiscovered neurodivergent children.
Firstly, thank you, Catherine, for inviting me and Phil to come and talk on the podcast. I think it is really important that dads' voices are heard. Thinking back to becoming a dad, I think for me it was probably one of the most affirming parts of my life because I always knew that I wanted to be a dad. That was always part of my life plan. And when my daughter Amber was born, I got that confirmation that this was meant to be. This is really part of who I am. Now, Amber didn't, as you say, get a diagnosis until early adulthood, actually. So neurodivergence has come to our family quite sort of late on for her. But reflecting on Amber as a baby, as a small child, I'm a very tactile person. I love a big hug. That's just something that I enjoy and I get a lot of comfort from. And very early on into sort of Amber's life, we we could see that she wasn't that way. That sensory profile of hers that we didn't know about at the time just meant that she didn't want those hugs at a frequency that I might like them. I'll have a hug every day, every hour if the chance is there. So that was a little challenging for me, Catherine, because, I was like, here I am with my daughter that I love dearly, and I just want to pick her up and give her a squeeze. But yeah, soon on into her life, she was sort of giving us the sign that, I don't want that all the time. So we had to get our head around that.
You didn't have the narrative for it, did you, at that point? You didn't have an understanding as to why.
No, I admit there probably were times where I was just feeling a little rejected by my baby, my young daughter. Like, why doesn't she want to hug me? Just showed her nothing but love. As life has moved on, and even before diagnosis, when Amber's growing into her own person, and we're getting to know her. Every now and again, the need was there for Amber, and every now and again she'll come and she'll just say, "Can I have a dad hug?" And those hugs are they are full of love. The embrace from those hugs just makes up for the daily hugs that aren't there. Yeah, that was a bit of a challenge at the start of Amber's life, and also coming back to not knowing the narrative. We remember walking Amber to nursery, and she'd be very focused. I'm going to nursery. This is my route, and this is where I'm going to go. And often other children from the nursery would be running around the field and, "Hi, Amber," and she wouldn't respond. And we're like, "What's that all about?" And we didn't know. She was just focused. I'm on my journey. I'm going to nursery. This is what I'm doing right now. Again, being quite a sociable person myself, and my wife is, we were like, "Amber, that's a bit rude. You should say hello to people when they say hello back." But if we'd have known back then, if even if there'd been more conversation about neurodivergence in society, maybe then we would have been picking up a little bit on, okay, Amber's mind works a little different, and let's explore that a little bit more.
And I suppose naming that though, Mike, of not knowing that narrative then, that internalized rejection that you felt as a first time dad, it's the first time you've been a parent and you're experiencing rejection. And perhaps that's, an experience that rarely gets talked about, that internalized rejection. I'm just going to bring Phil in here. Has that been your experience?
Firstly, like Mike, thank you for inviting us on. And Mike, you've reminded me a couple of times that you're much more tactile, so we'll move from shaking hands to cuddles in person. So many echoes with my experience there. So similarly to Mike, didn't have that neurodivergent kind of lens on my daughter's childhood or on what I was bringing to the table, my experience there as well. From the being quite tactile, and my daughter not being, although that has changed as she's recognised her sensory needs as she's got older. That sense of rejection, absolutely, but also kind of a bit of an internal battle between kind of rejection and the need to provide a sensory kind of almost blanket for her. The blanking of people publicly, there's a lot of familiarity of experience there. So a really raw answer to that would be, yes, we didn't have the neurodivergent lens. And as a mental health nurse, thinking about what I bring to that relationship, a core part of my identity, and I don't want to speak for Mike here, but is built upon the ability to help other people, to understand other people. So when you feel like you can't understand, or you're struggling to understand and help someone that you absolutely adore and would break the world for, you really can feel quite impotent, to the point where I actually had CBT and counselling because of those challenges to my core belief. Because there was my role to help, there was my role to be a dad, there was my role in being a husband. And it kind of felt all I was left with was things like, because my eldest daughter, she would scream incessantly for hours and hours and hours. And obviously that had a big impact on mental health in the house. So I used to have to take her for walks in the woods using a sling. So cuddling her tight, providing that sensory kind of experience. But because of the screaming, I'd have to walk with headphones in, like noise cancelling headphones, and just walk to the quietest points of the woods to give my partner a break and to eventually help my daughter calm down. And despite all of the experiences that Mike reflected, despite all of our experiences, we didn't see and potentially didn't want to recognize that there could be potential neurodivergence. And there will always be kind of huge parental guilt and regret there, because things like she would come home from school and say, I want ear defenders, other kids have them. And we'd say, well, no, you don't need them, because we weren't seeing it through that lens. And Mike and I were reflecting that as mental health nurses, there was the risk, and I know especially for me, that my experience of autism was supporting special education provision or inpatient mental health units where kind of needs and challenges are so pronounced at one end of the spectrum. And I hate using the phrase spectrum, but then arguably at the other end, you have that kind of Hollywood perception of like the autistic savant. And we didn't feel that we fit anywhere kind of in that kind of sense of identity or vision of what neurodivergence looks like. And we definitely didn't see it in our daughter. So it was a hell of a journey, but you only realize how hard it was when looking back with that post-diagnostic lens. And so much of it was only revealed through the diagnostic process itself with, well, did your daughter ever do this? Did you ever experience that? So there's nothing like the benefit of hindsight, but it doesn't change how impactful that was and how that will absolutely colour the parenting choices we make kind of at the moment and will continue to make. Feel like we're making up for lost time in a way.
That's a really valid point, actually, for both of you as mental health nurses working. Perhaps you'd only ever seen autistic or neurodivergent people, young adults in distress, in crisis, and you didn't even recognize it in yourselves. So how are you going to recognize it in your children? Think about culturally in society, the last 15, 20 years, how much things have changed about what we understand about neurodivergence, what we understand about autism, what we understand about ADHD. So we look back, don't we, with those reflective lenses. But I think what stood out to me as you were both talking was the fact that neither of you saw it in yourself. And perhaps if you'd have understood it and seen it in yourselves, you'd have had a better chance of seeing it in your children. But you didn't have that starting point.
Absolutely. And something we both reflected on was, if you think about the portrayal of neurodivergence, and I've reflected on our experience of seeing a patient in extreme distress or the Hollywood representation, the other stereotypical view is you have the autistic boy with the trains lined up and things like that. And we were reflecting that that didn't reflect our experiences. And I know personally that during my diagnostic process, I even said out loud, I think my experience of autism is perhaps much more feminine, because I couldn't relate to the portrayal of a male autistic, but I could relate to the kind of high level of masking and the acting like a social chameleon and all these different things, which felt like what we're now beginning to understand as perhaps a more feminine profile. But I absolutely recognise that I didn't relate to what the media and what kind of conventional research said the male experience was. So, and that's not the media's fault at all. Very much in a generation of catch up at the moment.
There's a lot of work, though, to be done, isn't there, on stereotypes when it comes to autism, to ADHD, to neurodivergence. So my next question is about dad's experiences, because when we talk about stereotypes, dad's experiences are often very much missing from conversations about parenting autistic, neurodivergent children. And if you're a neurodivergent dad, it's even more so. So I want to explore with you both about where you felt most seen or where you felt most unseen as fathers by professionals, by services, or even within parenting spaces. Maybe you've accessed parenting spaces, maybe you haven't. And how do you think that has impacted you both?
Sadly, it's a lot easier to answer where we feel or where I feel unseen compared to where I feel seen. But I'm going to answer first with where I feel seen because I think it's nice to start with a positive. The first place I truly felt seen as a neurodivergent dad was meeting up with Mike at the group that he runs, which I know we'll come on to. Up until that, my entire experience of being a dad was very unseen. Social media especially really drives this kind of perception that dads aren't present in the space of parenting, especially in the neurodivergent space. There's a very much this kind of core identity and core kind of algorithm around like send mums. The school, for example, if there is a challenge, they will reach out to mum first, even if your number's the primary contact number on the account kind of thing. There is this presumption of speak to mum, which for me has always been a little bit frustrating because if I look at my two daughters, one diagnosed and one undiagnosed, but going through the process, our eldest daughter, who is experiencing the most problems at school, is a mirror of me. So if the school want advice on how best to support her, it's me that they probably need to speak to. If they want advice on how best to support our youngest daughter, it'll be my wife that's best to speak to because they're mirrors of each of us. But they never think to come to me first, no matter how many meetings I attend or all these different things. So school, online are two very clear areas, but they're also very big areas which influence our lives. Social media kind of arguably almost 24 hours a day, and school being one of the biggest parts of our daughters' lives. And then the other place would be work, which I know we're talking about being a neurodivergent father, but the reason why I mention work is, for example, my workplace, no, I have at least one daughter who is neurodivergent. They are aware of some of the challenges that we are working through and the extra level of support we're providing, the extra kind of layer of meetings that we have to attend and advocate for our daughter in. And despite the fact that we work in mental health and it being very well known that it is heritable, there has not been a single question asked on, have you considered this for you? Is there anything that you may need from this at all? Whereas my wife's experience in the workplace has been incredibly supportive. What do you need? Do you need any time off for meetings? What about your mental health? All of this stuff. So even from a workplace point of view, without me disclosing my diagnosis, there has been no thought towards it, whereas my wife has had a very different experience. My gut feeling is that's not just specific to the two different workplaces in which we're employed. I have a feeling there may be a commonality of experience there for other dads.
And you've got to feel safe, haven't you, to be able to speak up and even speak about your role as a parent or a carer and your children being autistic or ADHD or neurodivergent, for then you to be able to see how they react to that, for then you to be able to feel a sense of safety. But you make a really great point there, Phil, because you think about a safe workplace. If you were to bring up that conversation about flexible working because you are a parent carer of an autistic child or ADHD child, the first question you would hope to hear as a parent then is, well, what support could we give you? If we know it's strongly heritable, so do you need any support in accessing a diagnosis privately, or would some peer support help you in this moment? Do we have a group set up at work where we could bring neurodivergent parents together to support you? You're absolutely right that those things really, really matter, don't they? And when we talk about being seen or unseen, often it's those conversations that help us to feel seen.
And it's amazing the power of the smallest phrase, just the smallest thing. you can make as many connections around the strength of a neurodivergent brain and what that brings to the workplace, the skills, the tenacity, the everything beautiful that we bring to the workplace. But all it takes is one person, when reflecting on a different colleague, for example, to say, oh, I think they're a little bit autistic, and just that slight shift in tone, the rationale for them saying it to explain away what could be perceived as an odd behavior. That one throwaway comment can destroy your trust in an entire team or individual, and the ability to feel safe, kind of bringing your authentic self to the workplace. And especially where there's pressure, going back to the being a dad in the workplace, that kind of black and white male kind of provider mentality, the fear of risking your ability to be a provider by impacting your reputation in the workplace is something that I know I've definitely wrestled with.
I mean, with my daughter, being that she was diagnosed as a young adult, it's been less of a thing for us. But certainly with my son being diagnosed with ADHD throughout school, it's always felt like they just want to speak to his mum, my wife, rather than me. And that only really shifted when we started to explore um, neurodivergence for Jake, and and then having a meeting set up with the SEND teacher. I felt like there was a definite shift in the attitude in the room when I shared, "Oh, I'm a mental health nurse," and that kind of made them sort of sit up and listen, um, which is wrong because they should just be listening to dads anyway, because we know our children well. Um, so that's definitely a standout point for me. A struggle and a challenge in that situation is by that point, Catherine, you and I had already met, and we were doing the fantastic work that we've done before. So my knowledge was developing, and I was just thinking, hang on a minute, I think I've got more knowledge than the supposed school expert in the room. It was a challenge, and it just felt really sad that it took for me to kind of share my profession to really feel heard.
There's a real inequity, isn't there, that you're both describing in that school setting. What do you think would help dads listening to this podcast, maybe send teachers, schools who are listening to this podcast? How do you create that sense of equity that you bring to the table something just as equal as your partner?
That's a huge question. Similarly to Mike, it wasn't until I said, so one of the areas I specialise in is safeguarding, and I'm also a SEND link governor for another school. It wasn't until I said that out loud that they seemed to sit up and go, oh, maybe you've got something worth saying. So it's a shame that I can also echo that experience. But if I was advising other dads in a similar situation, it's to not fall into the trap of believing that the ability, this can sound really kind of big, but believing that the ability to pay for your family is more important or just as important as being able to be there for your family. Employers have a duty to consider kind of reasonable adjustments and everything like that. So making the time to attend the same meetings, making the time, finding the time to learn the language that you're going to need to use in those meetings, being more proactive, and showing that you're proactive in that space can make a big difference.
I would love schools, any educational establishment, to be more proactive, to putting it out there. What I would love to see is for an evening, to be chaired by the SEND provision of that school or college, inviting dads in, not just parents as a whole, because I know because of the conversations that I've had with other men, that if they're in a room full of women, they will often just shut up and let their wives talk for them. So I think if there was the opportunity to say, right, okay, all of you dads out there that are either neurodivergent yourself, or you have a neurodivergent child in our school or in our college, come in and we'd like to hear from you. Let's come and let's sit down and have a conversation. And I think that could help on so many levels. It would help with the relationship building between the parent and the school, but I think it would also demonstrate to the teachers in the school that, neurodivergence, there's no mold. We don't all look the same. We don't all act the same. And here's Mike, the mental health nurse, but here's Jeff, the banker, and uh, Bob, the builder, and just people from all walks of life, from all different parts of society, just to demonstrate that, there is no mold. We are all different, but we bring a lot to this, and we've got lots of valuable input to share with you, so you can provide a safe space for our children, um, an environment that is going to allow them to learn and to grow, um, and allow you to see what their true potential actually is.
Yeah, you've both known there, haven't you? This feeling of being silenced and sidelined, and how that is replicated in other households, in other schools. And it makes me think about, I mean, we're going to come on to the work that you're doing, Mike, that you've helped create this local neurodivergent dudes and dads group that you call NADS, Neuroaffirming Dudes and Dads. You've founded that locally because you recognised there was a real gap in support. And actually, it was how you and Phil reconnected with each other, wasn't it? After 20 odd years. I mean, you've just explained there what made you realise that neurodivergent dads need their own space. And I wonder what you've noticed happens when dads connect with other dads who just get it.
What have I noticed? That I've just noticed, uh, I've noticed how people can grow and start to believe in themselves, it given the right environment and level of kind of safety, i- in a community that is non-judgmental, and allows someone to really be their authentic self. When I set up NADS, it came around a time of me really having a deeper understanding of neurodivergence, and just looking and seeing that there isn't anything for just us men, and it comes back to what I said earlier about, you know given that space, if a lot of men are in a space where there's women, they just won't talk, because of anxiety a lot of the time. And I've had individuals in the group come up to me and say, this is so great that it is a male only space, because now I feel like I can talk. When I set the group up, I set it up because I thought that I would benefit from it, but also one of my good friends, um, who has neurodivergent children, we were having lots of conversations, and he shared that actually it would be really nice for him, although he's not diagnosed as neurodivergent, but for him to access a space where there are other neurodivergent guys, or dads of neurodivergent kids, who can have that conversation about what works, what do you find, what are the challenges that you've experienced, in parenting, but equally to learn from sort of young adults that access the group, to hear from them about how they navigated the school system, how they were able to access support, or just manage and survive in that system that we know needs to have work done. Um, so that's been really helpful, and it gives hope. It really does give hope. So, another of the dads that comes, he's looking around and he's going, right, these guys, they're all talking about the same sort of thing that my son does, and I see him in them, and here we are having a great time together. Yeah, we'll talk about neurodivergence, but then we'll go off and talk all sorts of random stuff because it's safe to. We've had conversations that go on for hours about music or building offices in the garden, and it's just a lovely space, Catherine. And you know, I there are weeks when I think I'm not sure I want to go, but I always do, and I always come away feeling like my mood has been buoyed. I'm lifted, um, because we do share that sense of hope, and just yeah, seeing people grow in confidence and start to look after themselves maybe a little bit better or understand themselves a little bit better. It's just it's a beautiful thing to be part of, and I'm really, really proud of it.
And what about you, Phil? Because it was this group that Mike founded that reunited him, didn't you, after 22 years? What have you noticed happens when dads connect with other dads who just get it in this space?
I mean, I can't talk kind of highly enough of the space that Mike has created. So, as a late diagnosed male, it can feel really lonely place because you're looking through your entire existence through a completely new lens. You get the post-diagnostic sense of disablement, all of these different experiences. So much of the content that is accessible out there is very much aimed at the female experience and kind of the algorithms drive that at the moment. So when you don't fit that kind of lining up the trains image of a young child, it feels like there isn't stuff out there that reflects your experience. So what that space provides is the opportunity to connect on so many different levels, whether it's the commonality of experience, whether it's the love of music, whether it's talking about dinosaurs or shed building or kind of tattoos, whatever it is. It's really nice to be able to connect with people, and it does really alleviate a lot of that loneliness. But I know we've got kind of a bit more space to talk about the kind of the male experience and the space, as I said, the space that Mike has created. And when men connect in that way, I think it's quite soothing. I think it can do a lot for self-regulation. And I've watched, as I'm sure Mike has, people kind of enter that space and sit down and kind of very openly and very bravely say that they're struggling, and then walk out as if the whole world's been lifted off their shoulders. And what's really nice is I don't think there's ever a sense that we're taking that weight on for each other. We're just providing the space for people to take it off themselves. So NADS is an absolutely beautiful thing.
You know, as you've both been talking about this feeling of being silenced and sidelined and not having a voice, and Mike, you creating this space where other dads can connect and can bond and can, you know, fill each other with a sense of hope and optimism by sharing their experiences. There's that space, isn't there, that you've carved out, but then there's this other space that you're both describing, and that is the space that you find yourself in. Particularly, you've both touched on this, in the school setting, and still not feeling like you have a voice that is equally heard. And it just makes me think, listening to you both, about how much more needs to be done in working with schools, in getting that message across that, you know, dad's voices matter too, equally. And how do you get that message across? And I hope that this podcast episode, I hope that you can certainly share it with, and certainly our listeners can share it with their Senkos in the school, and with other dads, and to really get that message across that, you know, it's great as a school if you're thinking about setting up a parents group for autistic children or neurodivergent children, but really think about a specific group, a space for dads, to have their voice heard, and how different that is. That really comes across in what you're both exploring here. And it also touches on this idea that dads are just expected to cope, aren't they? They're expected to cope, to stay practical. Phil, you've talked about this sense of, you know, things needing to feel safe, certainly at work. Mike, you talked about letting your partner talk in certain situations. What do you think helps you? What has helped you when you're carrying all of that internally, when things feel overwhelming for you, when maybe you've reached burnout? What actually helps, and what do you wish people could understand? about supporting neurodivergent dads in those moments? What do you want to share?
If we think of neurodivergence as being not typical as a comparison point to neurotypical, is recognizing that neurodivergent dads aren't necessarily going to be typical dads. And I know that sounds really, really obvious. But if we think about all the stereotypes of dads, there's the fact that they don't carry a mental load. Well, as neurodivergent dads, we're already carrying the mental load of being neurodivergent. And then you add wanting to be the best dad in the world on top of that. The hyper empathy, we're much less likely to be the typical dads that you'll see going to the pub on the way home and avoiding the bedtime routine, or spending all weekend away with the lads at a stag do. And I know I'm leaning on a stereotype there, but society's message is that kind of we're all the same, and we're not. And as neurodivergent dads, we're either parents of neurodivergent kids, or we're also neurodivergent ourselves as parents, often unrecognized, often late diagnosis. And the general message across society is that kind of men are the problem. And what I find really helps, and especially with the space that Mind's created, is that reminding ourselves that we're not necessarily the problem. And that if we know ourselves and that we start to learn about our own brains, and to steal some of your phrasing, Catherine, kind of if we're on that journey to our authentic selves, finding those spaces, that connection with others, the safe spaces, the kind of for example, for myself, I do a daily reflective journal every single morning. I'm on a 230 day unbroken streak at the moment. For example, learning about myself, that music for me is more powerful than any medicine I could ever take. Finding those shorthands, like in our house, so that we're not blaming the person, we're owning our own experience. If we're getting overwhelmed and someone tries to do something that we can't cope with, we simply have a shorthand and we just say out loud, that sensory says no. And the other person who may want to hug or maybe dancing or singing, whatever it is, understands that for that person, that's a struggle, but it's not me that's the problem. It's just part of the experience. So, but all of that has come from taking the time to learn ourselves. That we reflected it. It feels like we're in a pivotal moment in society. And I know that my kids will be able to be themselves in a way that I never could, because as parents, we're giving them permission to be, and hoping, really hopefully, making sure that they know that they will be loved because of who they really are, not who they present as or who they pretend to be. And even in those darkest moments, knowing that you're on that journey and you're advocating for your children, not just in the moment, but for their futures, that can give you the strength to get through the next bit. And that is kind of one of the most powerful things, that when you're connecting with other neurodivergent dads, you can kind of share that experience or support others on that experience. And I know that Mike will talk very positively about the changes he's observed kind of in members of the group. But Mike, I think you need to kind of understand how powerful some of those experiences are. And a lot of those experiences will be unspoken and perhaps kind of unrecognized at the meeting, but recognized when people go back home.
I just wanted to reflect on two things that you talked about there. So this daily journaling, which, 200 and odd days of a streak, that is no mean feat. But finding something that works for you, and self-reflective journaling, and also the sensory says no, being able to find a phrase that works in your household with all these multiple different needs. I mean, that one phrase is so weighted, isn't it? Because it has come about from all of this knowledge and experience as a family that you have created, and you all know what that one thing means. So language sounds really important in your home, Phil, but language that's built on understanding, on safety, and the journaling. What about you, Mike? What have you found that actually helps you?
I'd say I mean, knowledge is power, right? And the biggest thing for me is just accessing that knowledge from other people. Listening to podcasts has been really helpful, and listening to other men talking on podcasts about their experiences. certainly at the beginning of my sort of self-discovery of ADHD, the first time that I heard people talking about RSD on a podcast, it was a light bulb moment for me. It was incredibly powerful and emotive. Everything that they spoke about, I could relate to. So that's just been incredible. It really helps. But then to share my knowledge as well, the same in my family. As I've sort of entered the world and the community of neurodivergent people, conversation in my house is developed in such a positive way. We understand each other more now, um, and that's really helpful. Um, uh, because now my wife knows that there's a reason that I do the things that I do, and it's on reflection when I got my diagnosis, like she was on the informant report, she's like saying about how there's certain things that I do that I didn't even ever see, Catherine. But now we know that there's a reason why we do the things we do. That's massively helpful. But also for me, what helps is just recognizing my needs as an individual to be in outdoor spaces, and to exercise regularly, because the impact that has on my mental health is huge. It's really, really crucial for my mental health to be outside, to be walking the dog or going for a run. Um, yeah, that helps massively. And yeah, and being part of the community that is NADS, and hearing about other people's stories, and hearing about how they've learnt about themselves. That's just, yeah. As I said, sometimes I feel like I can't go. I don't want to go tonight to the group, but actually it does exactly the opposite, and I walk away with a bounce in my step.
And it's often worth remembering that, isn't it? Those things that really help you, of knowing that these are the things that help me. And, I think finding those things that that help you is such a hard thing to do. And for many people, maybe haven't found those things. Exercise, something you have to build into your day. Knowledge, hearing other people's stories. Again, they don't always exist, do they? And very often what happens is you have to create those spaces for those stories to be heard, and that's what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's so powerful. Just in all areas of my life, personal, professional, um, sharing that knowledge and helping other people to understand themselves, and giving that sense of I'm not alone. M- I'm not the only one whose brain works in this way. That's huge. That's really, really powerful.
As we come to an end today, and what is giving you both hope? You've both mentioned that term hope today as we've been talking, but what gives you both hope? Maybe for yourselves, for your children, for other neurodivergent dads. What message would you want a dad listening to this episode to hear?
My message to other dads is open up those conversations. Look out for the groups that you can perhaps become part of. I think there is hope that groups like NADS are going to pop up all over the country. I really hope that is the case, because it wasn't a huge undertaking to get it started. I did feel a little overwhelmed at times, but actually it's okay. And what we're creating is a community that is going to be self-sustaining. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see more of those. Um, um, my hope for my children is that, much the same as what Phil's already said, is that they now know that, it's okay to be me. It's okay to be my authentic self, and to share that with my friends. And I've got a lot of hope for the younger generations. My children are in their teens. and the relationships that they have with their friends are very open when it comes to diversity on all levels, whether that's gender, sexuality, neurodivergence. There's lots of openness there. So that fills me with a lot of hope. And I just hope that our children are seeing what we're doing with communities like NADS and seeing us as positive male role models that don't fit the stereotypical norm of what a man is. But hopefully we're reshaping that. We're showing that men can be full of empathy and compassion and want to support each other, create safety for each other. Um, and through role modeling, our children are going to go on and do the same with that already kind of open mind that they have.
And what about you, Phil?
Oh, I'd like a good DJ. That was the perfect segue. I was going to talk about role modeling as well. I think Mikey described it beautifully, that stereotypical view of what a man is and what a dad is, as neurodivergent men, as neurodivergent dads. I think just any advice would be to not role model what the generation before thought that role should look like, but to role model being authentic. My dad's brain was always described as a butterfly brain, and my brain's been described in many, many different ways. And I would describe my kids as having beautiful brains, and that's not a bad thing. It's a difference, and if we're not authentic, if we don't role model being authentic, then we get to undo everything that we're advocating for. And that one of the hardest things to do is be authentic, but it's also one of the most powerful things we can do. So finding those safe spaces, like we said a little bit earlier, finding what works for you, whether it's journaling, whether it's exercise, whether it's music, Lego, everyone's different. But creating that scaffolding around you, which allows you to be authentic. And sometimes that scaffolding is people, not just things. And that it takes bravery. It's a difficult journey. But we all say we'd do absolutely anything for our kids. And I think it's on us to actually kind of do it. But as Mike says, there is so much hope out there at the moment. The authenticity around all sorts of different protected characteristics, sexuality, gender, neurodivergence. I feel very, very confident, like Mike has said, that our children will grow up in a very, very different world, a more accepting world. But we are the custodians of that world as adults and as parents at the moment. So we need to hold it in place to make sure that as they grow up into it, it's there for them.
Just to sort of add to that, and sort of a final thought really from me is that, and a message for dads is you can absolutely learn from your children. They don't always have to learn from you. You can learn a whole lot if you sit down and listen to your children.
It's been such an insightful conversation with you both. I feel like I've learned so much from you both about your experiences and what it feels like to be a dad in this space. And you're both modeling, really role modeling to other dads, to your own children who themselves are going to become dads one day. The work that you're doing is so important. So thank you both for coming and sharing some of your experiences.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Mike for creating the space that brought it all together.
If any of the topics mentioned in today's episode are of special interest to you and you'd like to discuss this further, you can book a one-to-one session with a peer guide on our website at autismcentral.org.uk. Autism Central would encourage listeners to do their own research and make informed decisions about any strategies or equipment mentioned in this podcast. Any advice or suggestions given by a guest or peer educator do not replace or substitute advice received from direct consultation with a qualified professional. The Autism Central podcast is produced by Autism Central and is the copyright of NHS England.